For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The screaming of my friends, the splintering of wood, the monstrous snarls from the window, it all faded into a dull drone. All that existed was the space between Kael and me, charged with an impossible choice. Everything my family had ever taught me screamed caution, screamed danger. He was one of them. But everything my gut, my soul, screamed in that moment was to trust him. I gave him a sharp, single nod. That was all he needed. "Get them in the cellar," he ordered, his voice already changing, taking on a rougher, deeper timbre. "Now." I did not hesitate. Maya, Liam, everyone, cellar, go. I shoved them toward the heavy wooden door set into the floor near the kitchen. They stumbled, tripping over each other in their haste, their faces a mess of tears and terror. I pulled the door open, herding them down the rickety steps into the musty darkness below. "Elara, come on," Maya cried, her hand outstretched. "I'll be right there," I lied, and slammed the heavy cellar door shut, dropping the thick iron bolt into place just as the creature finally smashed the window frame and hauled its massive, malformed body into the room. It was worse than I had imagined. Taller than a man, a hideous fusion of wolf and human, its fur matted with filth and old blood, its yellow eyes, burning with mindless rage, fixed on me. It let out a roar, and the stench of carrion and wet fur washed over me. I backed away, my hand instinctively going to the small, silver-bladed knife strapped to my ankle. It would not be enough. But the beast was not looking at me anymore, its head cocked, its attention drawn to Kael. He stood in the center of the ruined living room, his shirt hanging open. The change was already upon him. I could hear the sickening pop and crunch of his bones reshaping themselves under his skin, his body contorted, muscles bunching and elongating. It was violent, agonizing, yet there was a strange, terrifying grace to it. This was not the chaotic corruption of the rogue. This was a deep, primal power being unleashed under duress. Fur, the color of a moonless night, sprouted across his skin. His handsome face twisted and stretched into a lupin muzzle, and the last sound he made as a man was my name, breathed out in a pained groan. Then he threw his head back and howled. It was not a cry of rage, but a challenge, a declaration of territory. The rogue answered, and the two wolves launched themselves at each other. The cabin became a maelstrom of claws and teeth, furniture splintered, lamps shattered. They were a blur of dark fur and flashing fangs, a whirlwind of primal violence. The rogue was bigger, more frenzied, but Kael was faster, smarter. He moved with a warrior's purpose, dodging and weaving, his attacks targeted and precise. I saw my chance. As the rogue lunged, exposing its flank, I drew my silver knife and darted in. I was not a warrior, but I was a keeper. I knew the anatomy. I drove the blade deep into the thick muscle of its haunch. It shrieked a sound of pain and fury and swiped at me. The claws caught my arm, tearing through my jacket and skin. I cried out, stumbling back as white-hot pain exploded from my shoulder to my wrist. The momentary distraction was all Kael needed. He lunged, his powerful jaws closing around the rogue's throat. There was a final, terrible gurgle, and the rogue's massive body went limp, crashing to the floor. Silent. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the heavy, lupin panting of the magnificent black wolf standing over its vanquished foe. It turned its head, and for a moment I was staring into eyes that were not gold, but the familiar, intelligent dark brown of Kael's. He took a step toward me, then seemed to think better of it, a low whine escaping his throat as he looked at my bleeding arm. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a trembling exhaustion. I slid down the wall, pressing my hand against my wound, my head spinning. I watched as the violent process of the change reversed itself, Kael's body shrinking and softening back into its human form. He lay curled on the floor, naked, trembling and bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts. The first pale, gray light of dawn was filtering through the broken window. The party was over. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. I grabbed a tartan blanket from the back of a miraculously intact sofa and walked over to him. He looked up as I approached, vulnerable and exposed. The arrogant host was gone. The monster was gone. All that was left was the man, his secret laid bare in the wreckage of his home. I knelt and draped the blanket over his shoulders. Our eyes met, and in that gaze 1,000 things were said without a single word. Understanding, gratitude, awe, and something else, something new and fragile and fiercely potent, beginning to take root in the ruins. "Your arm," he rasped, his voice raw. "You're hurt worse," I replied softly. My hand came up, acting of its own accord, to brush a stray lock of damp hair from his forehead. His skin was fever-hot beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the cooling air. A tremor went through him at the contact. he did not pull away. Instead, he leaned into my palm, a soft, almost imperceptible movement, and his eyes closed for a second. It was a silent surrender, a laying down of arms that felt more intimate than a kiss. The war between us was over. The farce had shattered, and in its place, something terrifyingly real had just begun.